And that anger, it's not only understandable, it's right. It's a reflection of the truth that our black community has lived. While not from lived experience, this must also be understood by our non-black communities. To ignore it, to toss it out, would be to ignore the values we all claim to have, that are all the more important during a time of crisis. I believe in Minneapolis. I love Minneapolis. And in believing city, we must believe that we can be better than we have been. We must confront our shortcomings with both humility as well as hope. We must restore the peace so that we can do this hard work together. George's girlfriend, Courtney, said he was all about love and all about peace. He did not receive that love and that peace from our officers on the night of May 25th. But we can still honor him by practicing those values during a time of great strife. That is the task ahead of us. And at this time when one crisis is sandwiched against another, this could be the mark. This could be in time when several years from now, we can look back to know that we rose to right the wrongs of the past, not just with words, but with action. We will be working with community. We need to be working with community to sort through those action steps. Time when we picked up the rubble. A time where we picked up the rubble, the glass, and found peace in our hearts. Not an ignorant peace, but an awakened one, where we can truly make change possible. And so in the coming days, we will have an all-out effort to restore peace and security in our city. I've authorized a unified command structure that allows our chief, Arredondo, to utilize resources, personnel from other jurisdictions. We've requested assistance from the state, and we are thankful to the governor as well as from the State Patrol. This work is about protecting community. This work is about protecting infrastructure needed to get through this pandemic together. Our communities need these assets, especially during a pandemic. Our communities need grocery stores for food. We need banks for cash. We need pharmacies for needed medication. Hold these communities dear by doing right by them and by safeguarding them and these community assets that we know they need, especially during the pandemic. We need to offer radical love and compassion that we all have in us. I believe in this city, and I know that you do too. Next, I would like to invite up Council Vice President, who has been a tremendous leader.
Amazing grace, how sweet is the sound that saved a wretch like me. I grew up in a religious family. religious home. I grew up in the church with Reverend Jeremiah Wright, and he talked about these injustices every Sunday. I want to offer some amazing grace to Bridget Floyd, to Philanice Floyd, to Tara Floyd, Rodney Floyd, to the entire Floyd family. My deepest condolences and sympathies are with you in this traumatic, tragic moment of grief. I also stand here to grieve with my community today, with all the black people all throughout this country, throughout America, and right here in Minneapolis. We feel there was a knee on all of our collective necks. A knee that says black life does not matter to the institutions that dictate what happens in this culture and society. I am a part of this system to help take that knee off of our necks. And that is the work that I will be. As we stand here grieving yet another loss of black, a senseless, tragic loss. I really don't, but I know that'll change. And so I am asking my colleagues, the mayor, and anyone else who is concerned about affairs in our community to declare of emergency, declaring racism issue. Until we name this virus, this disease that has infected America for the past 400 years, we will never, ever resolve this issue. To those who say bringing up racism is racist in and of itself, I say to you, if you don't call cancer what it is, you can never cure that disease. And so in an effort to try and cure this disease, stating exactly what everyone else has witnessed, this racism. Today is a sad day for Minneapolis. It's a sad day for America. It's a sad day for the world. And all of the people that are in the streets protesting, you have every absolute right to be angry, to be upset, to be mad, to express your anger. However, you have no right to perpetrate violence and harm on the very communities that you say that you are standing up for. We need peace and calm in our streets, and I am begging you for that. We will be working with black community leaders, develop and create a healing space at the site of the 3rd Precinct so that people can grieve, express their concerns, their anger in a safe and humane way. This is a tragic moment. Like Mayor Fry, I love the city of Minneapolis. I have spent the last 41 years as a resident of this city, and this is home. And we cannot allow outsiders or our own Minneapolitan residents to destroy our city. So we want to work together to ensure that people have their voices heard in a safe and manner. In the words of Leroy Williams, who was a first-hand eyewitness to Mr. George Floyd's terrible demise, we got to make a change, bro. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Fry. Thank you, Council Vice President Jenkins. I want to first by saying that I'm absolutely sorry for the pain, the devastation, and the trauma that Mr. Floyd's death has left on his family, his loved one, our community here in Minneapolis, and certainly across the country and the world. And I know that our community is in trauma and that they are trying to find ways to heal. From the very beginning, I wanted to make sure and ensure, and we will continue to do, those who are wanting to express their First Amendment rights and go through this healing process absolutely have that from me, and that is a guarantee as your chief. Said, even prior to Mr. Floyd's death, we have had a community that has been in trauma for quite some time. And what I cannot allow as chief is for others to compound that trauma. And so if individuals, as it occurred last night, are committing behavior and acts which are criminal, which are looting our businesses, as Council Vice President Jenkins had mentioned, are so vital to the health and vitality of our community. If they're looting those stores, if they're robbing people of essential needs and services for themselves, endemic, their loved ones, if they are setting buildings and structures on fire, which are harming the safety of our elderly and our youth, allow that as chief. And so I know that there is currently a deficit in our city. And as I wear this uniform before you, I know that this department has contributed to that deficit of hope. But I will not allow to continue to increase that deficit by re-traumatizing those folks in our community. So I am sure that we restore peace and security in our community. As Mayor Fry said, we are going to have a unified command system. We are going to have resources to make sure, again, that all parts of our city, from the Phillips neighborhood to North Minneapolis, to all of our sections of our city, have that. We want to continue to make sure that our community gather in spaces to, again, to heal, in honor certainly of Mr. Floyd. But I cannot allow criminal acts and threaten the safety and also, again, compound the trauma that already exists. I have been in constant communication with community leaders, community healers, and as both Mayor Fry and Council Vice President Jenkins said, they want to make sure that we have that space and a safe space for those folks to do that. And so we will continue to do that. But again, I also, want to just acknowledge my condolences to Mr. Floyd, his family, and friends. Thank you.
A few questions. I need to leave in a few minutes, though.
How did things get so out of hand last night? Were you guys prepared for what happened after 7 o'clock?
What we experienced, which was a different dynamic shift from the first evening of the demonstrations, were there was a different tenor last night. There was a different group of individuals, and I want to preface this, that come together have been doing so peacefully. But there was a core group of people that had really been focused on causing some destruction. Certainly we saw that with some of the looting. We were certainly prepared in terms of that immediate area to provide for the safety. But if you followed, of course, the events last night, the crowds got, and so our number one priority is the preservation of life, and so we wanted to make sure, looking at that from those who are gathering peacefully in the area, who are also being threatened and risked, our neighboring residents, and also those businesses. And so there was a shift that certainly.
Anything about there are allegations that there are some of the people who started some of the break-ins, the looting of businesses, were folks outside agitators. We've been hearing people all over social media right now. Any leads on that?
We continue to follow that information, that intel, and keep as we speak. I will just say that it was clear to me, and also hearing from our local community leaders, that many of the people that were involved in the criminal conduct last night, Minneapolitans to them. And so, yes, there were certainly people who were involved in the activities last night that were certainly not recognized as being here from the.
Any police officers hurt from yesterday, and the National Guard coming in, or any updates on that for tonight?
So we did have some reports of injuries to some of our police officers. I'm happy to report that no significant. There were some community members who were out there demonstrating who also suffered some minor injuries. And again, fortunately, no significant injuries that I am aware of. Mayor Fry, in terms of a National Guard request, Mayor Fry is to make that formal declaration. And as he mentioned, he has had conversations with Governor Walz. So. One of the things that I'm very proud of, also being a born and raised here in the city, over the course of the last several days, I've been talking to many of friends, family, in our broader community who have said they want to make sure that even though we're experiencing trauma in our city, they don't want to exacerbate that. So they're going to be out there. You're going to start seeing more of our, again, community healers, faith leaders, our elders, and so I think you'll see a shift in that today. So I'm always hopeful, because it's the same community that has supported me throughout my career.
Mayor, is the Governor South with the National Guard?
Yes, I have made that phone call to the governor, and has been requested.
And was there a response back from him?
The governor and the state have been very helpful.
Okay.
But I would further direct that I believe they'll be in contact shortly.
What do you say to the businesses that were the targets that were looted, and the Club Foods and the apartment fire? I mean, it's tragic all the way around this whole thing. Have you had contact with any businesses about what happened last night?
I have not as of this point this morning. These businesses are staples in the community. Many of them are long-standing institutions. But more importantly, in a time of pandemic, they're essential for community needs, ranging from food to financial services. These are pieces of our community that we're going to need over weeks and months. When you have one crisis that is sandwiched on top of another, it's all the more important that we're able to yes, keep community, and also keep these very critical pieces safe. And I've spoken with the chief, and that is most certainly part of the plan as we move towards tonight and the coming days.
Some people have said they thought the word statement varied greatly from what we saw in the video, and that compounded to the trauma. Why did we see there? How did that occur?
I've heard the same thing. I do know that at the time the incident occurred, there was a lot of was developing and changing, and so I have heard that, and it is never to put out information that would cause some of the pain that others had felt, or even doubt some of the information that was coming out. And I'm committed that we will do better to make sure that we're getting as much factual information out as a timely manner as we.
Where that initial information came from? Was that from statements from officers at the scene? Was it from some other source of information?
Unfortunately, I don't have all the details to that, but I'll get back with you on that.
Chief, what was the strategy last night? Was it to maintain control of the 3rd precinct and let the looting go? Was it just you were understaffed as far as positioning?
Two priorities always is going to be the preservation of life. At some point in time during the events, really sort of migrated, and also it came down to a matter of resources. I will tell you that when you have fires that take place, Chief Friedel, and I'll certainly let him speak, but we cannot allow, and he certainly won't allow, his men and women to go in there and take care of those fires if they're not protected. And so also shifted resources, and we certainly are never expecting these to involve arson. But once that dynamic shifted, it required other resources, policing resources, to assist the chief. And if he
How
wants
tough
to,
is it for you as a chief to sit there and watch this kind of go down like this?
it's very difficult for me. Again, I'm born and raised here in Minneapolis, a neighborhood kid. Difficult, and I have an obligation to our 400,000 plus residents, visitors, and workers to preventive trust and safety. And so it is very difficult. But I'm hopeful and I'm optimistic because, again, the vast majority of our Minneapolis community was not that occurred last night. And so continue to be in communication with myself. Obviously, Mayor Fry and Council Vice President, you're going to see more of a footprint from our community out there in support of the peace that we all want.
So if we have time, Mayor, you might just take one more question that we can keep. Please, Chief Friedel, I know that people probably have questions about the fire, but we've got to get the mayor on to the next thing.
If you have one more question for you, I'm happy to take it.
Anything can the city do to help these businesses and these homeowners who lost things last night?
Conducting some strategizing sessions over the coming days. Obviously, one of the difficulties we have is facing a $165 to $200 million revenue shortfall and then expenses that are resourced towards COVID-19. The monies that we presently somewhat limited, but this sort of calls the question of how much we do need assistance from the government now. We needed it before this killing took place. It's all the more essential after. Thank you.
I think they said you guys could stay
Yeah,
on for
Chief Friedel, could you answer a question or two? Sure. Chief Friedel, could you step to the microphone?
Yes.
Do you have a count on the number of fires, total for us right now from last night?
I just got some information this morning after we sort of wound down a little bit this morning. I think we had 16 structure fires last night. We probably had a few additional runs related, not necessarily structures involved.
And any injuries to firefighters?
No, fortunately we had no injuries to firefighters, and I had no report.
Can you provide more detail about this new command center or incident center and what services are part of this that might not have been available last night?
Yeah, unified command structure. Yeah, no, in what will happen is when we establish a unified command structure is just bringing, when we start bringing us, whether it be fire, police, whoever, when we bring additional resources, we unify a command structure. In other words, there's representation from all of those resources that come in. There is somebody from that resource who is part of that command team. That helps us be able to develop a plan to address the issues we're facing. And so, in its way that they become, intimately involved with establishing a plan to move forward.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, both.
Yeah, man. Appreciate that.
become secure, I have to have value. I want to be worth something. I want to be worth enough to attract the attention of others. But your value is something you have to find
You're on point, fight. Once again, Tip.
That's not my business.
Yeah, water.
Well, we only serve paying customers, so you'll have to order more than anywhere else.
50 dumplings. Is it a deal?
Huh?
You feed me, and I'll take care of those guys for you.
But,
Of USA, USA, USA. Wow. Thank you so much. What an unbelievable crowd. This is unbelievable.
USA, USA, USA.
All you need, brother, please, we here to do press. Don't block press. We're here to get a message out. Let's not argue between each other. In order to get an arrest, all you need is probable cause. If you see a crime and a criminal, and there is no reason for the crime, an arrest is made. Then a grand jury decides if there's an indictment. The jury decides whether or not there's a conviction. You do not anything more than you have now to arrest those 4 policemen. A probable cause right now. You have a deceased person. You have a tape showing how he was deceased. You have a tape showing the other 3 police did nothing to prevent it. Then they should tell these 4 police what they tell all of us in the hood. Tell it to the judge. We come to stand with this and stand with the community because this is a struggle that we've had all over this country. And let's not tell half the story. The reason why you see the anger in Minneapolis is because this is not the first time. And this is not the first time you ignored the right. Sometimes that Martin Luther King Jr. said that sometimes riots is the unheard speaking. Yes, we are nonviolent, but we understand the outrage and the anger. We're all angry, but we use our anger a different way. But when I got here, someone said to me, are you going to address the violence? The violence I'm addressing is how a man could hold a man down with a knee 9 minutes. That's when the violence started. On this corner, when this man was choked to death begging for his life. So we must act in a way to get justice and to get fairness. We're not asking for a favor, we're asking.
So I want to start by acknowledging the horrific tragedy in Minnesota of George Floyd. The death of George Floyd is absolutely tragic. That video that we saw, that I saw, that my staff saw, that the president saw. And the president put out a statement last night that at his request, the FBI and the Department of Justice are already well into an investigation as to the very sad and tragic death in Minnesota of George Floyd. I have asked for this investigation to be expedited and greatly appreciate all of the work done by law enforcement. It goes out to George's family and friends. Justice will be served. I can tell you at this moment, the president is receiving a briefing from the Attorney General, Bill, and the Deputy Director of the FBI. So that is ongoing as I begin this briefing. Secondly, I want to transition into some news from SBA and Treasury that was announced that today the U.S. Small Business Administration, in consultation with the U.S. Treasury Department, announced that it is setting aside of round 2 funding for the Paycheck Protection Program to be lent exclusively to those are community development financial institutions. CDFIs work to expand opportunity in low-income communities by providing access to financial products and services for local residents and businesses. So we're encouraged to see that. And then finally, before taking your questions, I wanted to address what's going on Twitter and with social media. I believe it is time to, quote, get the facts about Twitter and other social media platforms targeting their bias against conservatives online. If we were to judge the bias of Twitter and its top members, the case would be an easy one to make. Twitter's head of site integrity has tweeted that there are, quote, actual Nazis in the White House and no fact applied to this absolutely outrageous, offensive, and false claim made against its employees. But let's judge Twitter based on their actions, not based on the words of employees, and its actions are no better. President Trump recently received a SOAP label for a tweet. It was a false fact check and an accurate fact check, but nevertheless, Twitter moved forward. The deputy chief of staff here was the first user in the history of Twitter to receive a so-called, quote, manipulated media label for posting a video that played a verbatim clip. It is no coincidence that these 2 unbelievable interventions by Twitter were targeted against the United States and one of the president's top advisors. This is bias in action. And while big tech is quick to censor the president, quick to censor some of his top employees, they are very reluctant, it seems, to by Chinese officials some of the misinformation that has been spread by China. To move off of Twitter and move to Google, they created a search engine for the Chinese, blacklisted searches for human rights and allowed for easy surveillance. Facebook and Twitter have both taken paid advertising that spread disinformation about China's mass imprisonment of religious minorities, and Twitter has allowed Chinese officials to use its platforms about the coronavirus, undermine the pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong, and more. And then Seoul began spreading a conspiracy theory on Twitter, an egregious one, that are responsible for the spread of the coronavirus. And that tweet, that disinformation, it took all the way until today when we raised concerns about it to get a fact check. So they appear very hastily eager to censor President Trump and some of his employees when it comes to China. It's a bit befuddling. But no one believes in the First Amendment more than the president. The president will take action to ensure that big tech does not stifle free speech and that the rights of all Americans to speak, tweet, and post are protected. And finally, I just want to note one other action of Twitter that I learned just before walking out here, that on the Mueller report, their were anti-Trump by a ratio of 76-1. That's extraordinary, and it's not just bias aimed at President Trump and his employees. It's also aimed at everyday Americans. It's aimed at the movie Unplanned, as Twitter suspended their account and then came up with an excuse in the aftermath. And then just another example, that liberals are allowed to incite violence against the Covington kids who were in the end proven right, and their video was taken out of context, and yet these individuals were led by Twitter to incite violence. It's very disturbing to see. So those are some of the president's concerns, and with that, I will take questions. Jim. That's a very nice tie, Jim, by the way.
Thank you very much. Yesterday, the U.S. hit 100,000 deaths from the coronavirus. That happened at around 6 o'clock yesterday evening. It took until about 9 in the morning for the president to recognize that on Twitter. What took him so long?
Look, the president recognized that landmark before that was, after all, it was the impetus behind him lowering the flag to half-staff. He did that for several days, and that was an acknowledgement of that number approaching, and he acknowledged it in a tweet this morning.
But we hit 100,000 yesterday evening, and it took 13 hours, some odd hours, for him to recognize that and tweet about it.
Far in advance of that benchmark, as I noted, he lowered the flag to half-staff. The president has said, you mentioned 100,000, but the president has said one death is too many. He takes this very seriously. He said where this is the hardest part of his presidency. It's something that no one wanted to see happen.
And on Twitter, the president be fact-checked, especially this president who has made so many false and misleading statements that it has put, fact checkers to work across the world. I mean, he's uttered some 18,000 false or misleading statements, according to the Washington Post. If fact-check, any political leader out there should be fact-checked, isn't it President Trump? And aren't you trying fact-checking by going after Twitter like this?
Look, well, first I would say I disagree with all of those assertions that you're making there because, look, if you're going to get into the fact-checking business, there's no one that should be fact-checked more than the mainstream media. The number of things. To give you a list of some of the most egregious ones, that ABC News in December of 2017 falsely reported that Flynn would testify that the president directed him during the campaign to make contact with the Russians. That was false. In 2017, your network, CNN, botched their WikiLeaks and were forced to make on-air corrections. CNN's Jem Sciutto, another CNN one, dropped a fictional bombshell in 2018, July, claiming that Michael Cohen would tell federal investigators that the president knew of the Trump Tower. And there are many more, not to just put the onus on CNN there. So fact-checked, I think it should be the media.
There are news outlets that make mistakes from time to time. We own up to those mistakes. We correct those mistakes.
Not always. I have many you guys haven't owned up to I could get to.
We do on a regular basis. The president never owns up to any of his false or misleading statements or outright lies. You have pledged in this briefing room to never lie to the American people. The United States has never lied to the public before.
I'm around the president. His intent is always to give truthful information to the American people. And you mentioned that the media apologizes for their mistruths. I mean, I'm sitting here looking at other headlines in the New York Times saying there aren't enough ventilators to cope with the coronavirus. In fact, we had an excess of ventilators we've shipped around the world. Washington Post, U.S. health system is showing why it's for a coronavirus pandemic. We were ready. There's many more I could get to. I could, on the coronavirus specifically, I could spend the time going through these, but I don't think that's what the American people want to hear.
Yes. On the Minnesota case, does the president agree with the firings of the 4 police officers that they should be prosecuted?
I haven't talked to him about that specifically, but let me do this, that, you know, he was very upset when he saw that video. I was on Air Force One. I don't know if it was the first time he saw it, but again, on Air Force One, he was very upset by it. It was egregious, appalling, tragic, and it prompted him to pick up the phone, or the chief of staff to pick up the phone and say, we need to expedite what was already an FBI investigation. He wants justice to be served.
Yeah.
Yes, Jeff right there.
Thanks, Kaylee. Can you give us an update on when the president plans to sign the EO on Twitter and social media? And can you also give us an update on his plans for China and Hong? Is there an order coming on that as well?
So thank you for the question. First, I would note with regard to the timing of the EO, that should be this afternoon is what we're hoping for, hopefully before 5 p.m. But again, it could change in the works, but we are getting closer. With regard to Hong Kong, I would just say, said 2 days ago, but I would also say that China's decision to impose a new national security law in Hong Kong lies in direct conflict with its international obligations under the binding UN-registered Sino-British Joint Declaration, and that Secretary Pompeo determined that Hong Kong does not warrant different treatment under U.S. laws because Hong Kong no longer remains sufficiently autonomous from the PR. Further, I'd refer you to the State Department for now.
Just one more somewhat related. The House recently passed a bill about a minority group in China, the Uyghurs, if I said that correctly. Does the president plan to sign that? And is the White House going to treat bills, any concerns about bills that have been passed by proxy as not being constitutional?
So we would, first, let me say we would encourage Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats and others to come back to the Hill. It's more productive to have those members here. The Senate has convened, the House can do the same, and they can do. With regard to the Uyghurs, that's a very important question. We haven't received the bill yet, so the president hasn't been able to look through it, and I won't get ahead of him on announcing one way or the other on that, but I would note that the Trump administration continues to take actions to hold the CCP accountable for its highly repressive campaign against the Uyghurs and other religious and ethnic minorities. Paula.
Hey, Kaylee, thank you. On vaccines, in order to achieve herd immunity, you need about 80% of people to get this vaccine. Currently, only about 50% of Americans say they'll receive. Will the administration make the vaccine mandatory?
So the vaccine, we're working aggressively to get one, and we would like to get one by the end of the year. Depend on a vaccine. Vaccine's an important component of this, but there are also therapeutics. We're seeing there's not necessarily a tie to reopening and an increase in cases, so that's encouraging. And I would refer you further to Alex Azar, who's made extensive comments on a vaccine and the necessity.
It's clear if you guys will make it mandatory, if you'll use your federal powers, how you'll use them potentially to encourage people to get this vaccine, because if you don't have elderly people, compromised folks, they may not be able to go about their business again.
Yeah, I would have to talk to the president. I haven't talked to him about his views on making it mandatory or not, so I'd have to talk to him and get back to you on that. Yes.
Thank you, Kaylee. I wanted to ask you a question, first of all, about the comments in your statement. At the conclusion of your comments in regards to George Floyd, you said that justice will be served. What do you mean by that? That those officers who've been fired should be arrested? Do you mean by that those officers should be prosecuted? Do you mean that those officers who've been fired should be convicted? Justice should be served.
Yeah, I'll leave that to the justice system to work. President.
What do you mean when you say justice will be served?
That's in the president's statement, so I'd refer you back to being briefed on this right now, and we'll have more announcements.
Another matter in regards to what you said in your statement, in regards to the executive order. I realize it hasn't come out yet, and I realize we haven't seen the language, but we have seen reports. I work for Fox, and we've seen reports that it relates to the Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. And interestingly enough, former Vice President Joe Biden has also called for the repeal of Section 230. He says that it should be revoked immediately. But as you know, an executive order does not trump the law. An executive order, for instance, repeal the law. It can't in any way amend the law. So what would be the intent behind this executive order without getting ahead of what the president intends to sign?
Ahead of that, but the one thing I will say more broadly, you referenced that section, I think that would be included in what there are various shields in place that essentially shield some of these social media, allow them to censor conservative users, and we're not able to see what happens behind those shields. That section was one of those shields you mentioned, so we're looking at ways to remove those shields to shed some light on what is happening and some of the decision making behind the scenes. That's generally and broadly. We won't get ahead on any specific announcements that should come hopefully before 5 p.m. John.
Kelly, I want to follow up on Jim's question on fact-checking and Twitter, but first a clarification. Has the president spoken to the family of George Floyd?
Not to my knowledge. If he did, without my knowledge, that could have happened.
Do you know if he intends to, or will you get back to us on that?
I can ask him, and I can get back to you on that.
And regarding the fact-checking, I mean, the president clearly said things in these tweets that are not true. Do you not acknowledge?
No, I don't acknowledge that.
He said, for instance, that the governor of California is sending out ballots to anyone living in the state, no matter who they are, how they got there. That is not true. California is sending out absentee ballots to registered voters, not to anybody.
Yeah,
that's just not true.
So let me address in detail on the issue of ballots, and I'm going to lay out some of the president's concerns, and in that I will get to the California example. First, I want to note that there is a Pew study done that shows there's plenty of reason to believe that in the mass mail-in system that there is fraud. They estimated that approximately 24 million in the U.S. are no longer valid or are significantly inaccurate. So these are people who are on voter registrations that have not been maintained, that have not been kept up. More than 1.8 million have been deceased, they estimated. And then when you look and drill into some of the examples that we've seen in states, Nevada I read about this last week and it just really struck me. Perfect example of what the president is concerned about with mail-in ballots and the fraud that can be inherent in that. There were ballots, because Nevada mass mailed them out to voter rolls, that were piling up in apartment complexes, outside of apartment complexes in Las Vegas, sitting around in trash cans. This is how we're protecting ballots. It's extraordinary. Postal workers, one 36-year veteran carrier said she's never seen anything like these influx of absentee ballots. All of the people had moved or died when she set out to deliver on her first delivery route, and this happened from last week. She found 65 ballots of people who had moved or died on her second carry, and then as the week progressed, thousands just sitting in crates. I mean, this is extraordinary. This is not how we should be protecting U.S. ballots. In South Carolina, Dems force a rush transfer of mail-in voting, and this happened again recently. I think it was last week. Ballots for South Carolina turned up in Maryland. There's another example of 700 suspicious in Dallas, and an individual charged with second-degree felony illegal voting, and he's accused of visiting a woman in April to collect her blank absentee ballot, filling it out, and forging her signature. I mean, this is extraordinary. And then you go on, there's a New Jersey example of over 3,000 ballots set aside. And going to California, you mentioned, California is one of those states that's notorious for ballot harvesting. And in 2018, the registrar in Orange County said that they reported that his office had people dropping off maybe 100 or 200 ballots at a time. And somehow in LA County, 100 county is registered to vote. So the clean your register and you send out your entire register, auto send out these ballots. They end up in trash cans like in Nevada. They are subject to fraud, and that is extremely troubling.
But Kelly, I asked you a very specific question that California was sending out ballots to everybody in the state. That is a false statement. It is not correct. Will the president correct that, acknowledge that what he said is simply not true?
There is an executive order that was put recently by Gavin Newsom that would auto send to voter rolls, and that would lead to what the president was suggesting.
Yes. Excuse me, Kelly, to registered voters. It's not to everybody. It's to registered voters.
Yeah, to everyone, including dead people on the voter rolls, including to the mysterious 112% in LA County. That's not just everyone. That's everyone plus an extra 12%. And if you're not concerned about that, I'm sorry. I mean, the media is a very security of our elections, but when it comes to mail-in ballots, all of a sudden, the concern for election security.
But Kelly, you yourself have voted by mail.
Thank you very much.
Brian.
Research on mail-in ballots, research has shown that, one, it doesn't benefit either party, it increases voter participation, secretaries of state of both parties are still pursuing it, and fraud is not widespread. And so why is the president continuing to tweet about the impression that there's widespread fraud in the use of mail-in ballots when he himself used a mail-in ballot? The big question is, some are concerned that the president may be laying the groundwork to cast doubt on the election. Is that what he's doing by bringing this up?
Well, I appreciate you bringing up this question in specific using mail-in ballots. There's an important distinction, and I think it's lost upon a lot of people, but it's important to make, is that it's okay with mail-in voting so long as you have a reason. He's not okay with mass mail-in voting where you auto-send as voter rolls with people who are dead that are subject to fraud. That is the case. We saw off for you, I think, 3 of the 5 examples I gave you were from just this week and last week. So this does happen. And
Stanford University did a research study that showed that there wasn't widespread fraud in these vote by mail, and that it didn't benefit either party and increased voter participation. So why would the president be against that?
yeah, subject to both parties. This can hurt both parties. I would note that a bipartisan commission led in part by President Jimmy Carter, a Democrat, concluded ballots, quote, remain the largest source of potential voter fraud. So moving the entire country to that system doesn't make sense, and doing so in a hurried fashion ahead of November. Just go look at the Democrat Iowa caucus and how they tried to move to a new system.
Trying to lay groundwork to cast doubt on the results of the election.
Finally,
is he laying groundwork to try to cast doubt on the results?
No, he's certainly not doing that. And I would finally note, well laid out by the Wall Street Journal editorial board, that in 2016, minorities and first-time voters were more likely to have mail-in ballots thrown out. So that is another troubling concern. In fact, 319,000 of those total votes were rejected. Yes.
Thank you. Back in November, President Trump went up to Walter Reed, said it was for phase 1 of his physical. When does he plan to complete phase 2 and results to the public?
Yeah, I don't have an update on the physical, but because you asked that, I'll specifically and try to get back
to do it?
You what?
He does plan to do it?
Yes, he does. Yes. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for doing this. I wanted to ask you about, President has completed his 2 weeks of hydroxychloroquine. Have you spoken to him what he's feeling about? Is he feeling better? What's his feedback about that?
I did. I know that you emailed me a question to that effect, and I didn't have time to follow up with you via email. But because I saw that, I went into him just before coming out here, and I asked him that. And he said, quote, he's feeling perfect. Quote, he's feeling absolutely great after taking this regimen, and quote, he would take it again if he thought that he was exposed. So he is feeling very good. And I also would point folks, there's a very, very well done piece. It's very, with a lot of medical experts laying out about prophylaxis use of hydroxychloroquine. Tina Hessman-Say at sciencenews.org. It's very well done. She talks about the nearly 200 clinical trials around the world, including 28 involving healthcare workers. In fact, at Henry Ford, 3,000 healthcare workers are taking it as part of a trial. And there's some really excellent information there about you know, the use of prophylaxis for this.
A number of Indian Americans doctors have been writing. I have seen some of those letters. They are supporting President taking hydroxychloroquine. Some of them have themselves taking it. Have you still seen those too?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's a lot. It's not specific to the president, these doctors, but they just talk and they've seen, for instance, Sarah Lofgren, an infectious disease doctor at the University of School in Minneapolis. They're testing hydroxychloroquine there to prevent COVID-19, and she's known we're not seeing major issues out of the thousands of patients. We're not seeing things that some people are concerned about. And I would just note that it's important, of course, always, if taking hydroxychloroquine, get a prescription from your doctor. Doctors are the ones that need to be prescribing this. But that being said, I think hyperbole around this drug that has been on the market for 65 years, been approved for use, other maladies, and has been approved for off-label use. When there's a lot of hyperbole about this, some of the things I've seen reported out there, there are consequences deterring people from recruited into actual clinical trials. I have some quotes from a New York epidemiologist and conducting trials saying they're having trouble recruiting people because some of the myths that are out there. So it's important to note that this drug has been safely used by millions of people for a long time.
One more on China.
Yes.
President, yes, about he wants to mediate between India and China on the border dispute. Has been behaving very weirdly, very aggressively with its neighbors in the last few weeks, in particular in South China, so you must have seen on the Indian border side. What's the message President has to these countries?
Yeah, I'd refer you back to the president's tweet on that one. Yep. Yes, Christian.
Thanks, Kaylee. We saw reports that before swearing in John Ratcliffe as DNI, Rick Grinnell
declassify the trove of documents related to the Russia investigation, hinted that those could be made public sometime soon. Does the director plan on doing that anytime in the near future?
Yeah, so those, I believe, are under a process of review by the DOJ, so I'll refer to them on that. Tom, do you have a question? I thought I saw you had your hand raised. No?
Kaylee.
Yeah, back there.
Yes, hi. Thank you. I want to ask you about Russia's recent Libya. The U.S. AFRICOM has been issuing statements recently about new actions there, and in their statements they're saying that Russia is clearly trying to tip the scales in its favor in Libya, just like it did in Syria, by deploying military aircraft likely to provide close air support and offensive fires for the Wagner group that is supporting Libya's fight against the internationally recognized government. Do you on this, and do you agree with the U.S. AFRICOM assessment that their actions, the Russian actions in Libya, are destabilizing the region?
Yeah, we encourage de-escalation. For more, I'd refer you to the DOD. Chanel?
Thank you, Kaylee. If Joe Scarborough, couldn't he sue the president for defamation, and then in turn, couldn't President Trump immediately depose Joe Scarborough and allow him to go on under oath and explain how this 28-year-old woman was found dead by his desk with multiple skull fractures? Would the president a defamation suit from Joe Scarborough?
So on that, I would just refer you back to some of my previous comments that the audio on the Don Imus show was very disturbing, where there was a lot of laughing and joking about this matter that certainly is not a laughing and joking matter.
I mean, do you think that Scarborough has
other comments other than to just point back to the Don Imus audio? Who hasn't? Yes. Do you have a back question? Yeah.
When were the states first notified that they would have to take the lead in COVID-19 testing? I know the CDC was working on it early on, January, February, there was a problem with the test. When were states told, hey, you have to prepare and take the lead here in testing your populations?
So I don't have a precise date for you, but I know where the states came up with the plans that they thought they would need to have testing in order to reopen. Those plans were given to us, and Admiral Joie through all of those plans, ensured that we had enough supply to shore up those plans and to make sure that the states had enough to safely reopen. So that was how the process went, and the president has done really work with testing. 300 to 400,000 tests per day is a pretty good number, a very good number, I would say. More than 15 million done, beating the world in testing numbers, and under 10% positivity is at least the barometer given by the WHO necessary, and nationally we're at under 10% positivity. In fact, we're at 7.5 positivity rate. So we are doing quite well on testing. Is there anyone who hasn't gotten a question? Because right there.
Yeah, thank you. Has the president heard from his counterparts regarding the G7 summit? Is it actually going to take place in June at the White House?
We do aim for it to take place then. It's gotten positive reception. I inquired about this 2 days ago and was told it's getting very positive reception from world leaders. So we do intend for that to take place here.
I have a date on you.
Yeah, perfect.
Thank you. You yourself have been able to vote by mail several times. Do you think anyone with health concerns, who has health concerns about going to the polls, should have that same convenience, that right?
So what I would note again is the distinction between absentee voting and mass mail-out voting, where ballots are sent in a widespread fashion to people who are dead but on voting rolls, and those ballots end up in trash cans. That's a state-by-state consideration. I'll leave it to states to determine what is a valid reason. But there are, if you're an elderly person who's unable to get to...
They're doing this out of health considerations for a lot of their residents. And if they want to pursue...
Again, I mean, you're asking, I assume you're asking with relation to the pandemic that's going on. None of it is going to be in November. I'd first note that we don't have a crystal ball. But what I would say is that there are real concerns when you don't do in-person voting. And South Carolina is a great example where Democrats literally sued to force rushed mail-in voting. And what happened? You had ballots from South Carolina ending up in Baltimore. That is not a tenable system. And as states start to reopen and we see people out at beaches and feeling these mass spikes, and we see people safely going to restaurants and social distancing and washing their hands and doing wonderful mitigation techniques put forward by our experts, they're reopening society and they're doing so safely. And I think there's a way to continue our great civic duty of showing up and voting in a way that is safe. And the same way it's safe to eat at a restaurant, it's safe to go to a beach, we can vote in a safe that is good and to be celebrated as we head to November. All right, I think I took everyone's question, guys.
唔好害人哋啲仔女啦。好心啊，啲行徑有乜辛苦？日日打黑色衫，打黑色衫，我哋嘅後生仔。好心啊，啲行徑天生咁樣，日日爭打交，又破壞香港。打傳媒，打議員，打議員，打女仔，打女仔，打死黑警，打爛呢個家園啊！死黑警又唔做嘢，又唔讀書，死黑警我嘅唔公義，愛人嘅睇。我的愛你我全家仔女都死黑警，我冇做，點解要搞我咧？黑警就係我黑警，日日見黑警破壞香港法例，黑警破壞香港法例，黑警就係我哋仇人。黑警日日鬧事，黑警破壞香港法例，黑警破壞香港法例，香港法例。